Welcome to 10 Minutes a Day, a daily reading of the Catholic Church's social encyclicals. Today we continue with Quadragesimo Anno, written by Pope Pius XI in 1931.
This concentration of power and might, the characteristic mark, as it were, of contemporary economic life, is the fruit of that unlimited freedom of struggle among competitors has of its own nature produced, in which lets only the strongest survive. This is often the same as saying those who fight the most violently, those who give least heed to their conscience. This accumulation of might and power generates, in turn, three kinds of conflict. First, there is a struggle for economic supremacy itself. Then there is a bitter fight to gain supremacy over the state in order to use in economic struggles its own resources and authority. Finally, there is conflict between states themselves, not only because countries employ their power and shape their policies to promote every economic advantage of their citizens, but also because they seek to decide political controversies that arise among nations through the use of their economic supremacy and strength. The ultimate consequences of this individualistic spirit in economic life are those which you yourselves, venerable brethren and beloved children, see and deploy. Free competition has destroyed itself. Economic dictatorship has supplanted the free market. Unbridled ambition for power has likewise succeeded greed for gain. All economic life has become tragically hard, inexorable, and cruel. To these are to be added the grave evils that have resulted from an intermingling and shameful confusion of the functions and duties of public authority with those of the economic sphere, such as, one of the worst, a virtual degradation of the majesty of the state, which, although it ought to sit on high like a queen and supreme arbitress, free from all partiality and intent upon the one common good and justice, it has become a slave, surrendered and delivered to the passions and greed of men. And as to international relations, two different streams have issued from the one fountainhead. On the one hand, economic nationalism or even economic imperialism. On the other, no less deadly and accursed, internationalism of finance or international imperialism, whose country is where profit is. In the second part of this encyclical, where we have presented our teaching, we have just described the remedies for these great evils so explicitly that we consider it sufficient at this point to recall them briefly. Since the present system of economy is founded chiefly upon ownership in labor, the principles of right reason, that is, of Christian social philosophy, must be kept in mind regarding ownership and labor and their association together, and must be put into actual practice. First, so as to avoid the reefs of individualism and collectivism, the twofold character, that is, individual and social, both of capital or ownership, and of work or labor, must be given due and rightful weight. Relations of one to the other must be made to conform to the laws of strictest justice, communicative justice, as is called, with support, however, of Christian charity. Free competition, kept within definite and due limits, and still more economic dictatorship, must be effectively brought under public authority in these matters which pertain to the latter's function. The public institutions themselves, of peoples, moreover, ought to make all human society conform to the needs of the common good, that is, to the norm of social justice. If this is done, the most important division of social life, namely economic activity, cannot fail likewise to return to right and sound order. Populism, against which our predecessor Leo XIII had especially to inveigh, has since his time changed no profoundly than the form of economic life. For socialism, which could then be termed almost as a single system, and which maintained definite teachings, reduced into one body of doctrine, has since then chiefly split into two sections, often opposing each other and even bitterly hostile, without either one, however, abandoning a position fundamentally contrary to Christian truth that was characteristic of socialism. One section of socialism has undergone almost the same change that the capitalistic economic system, as we have explained above, has undergone. It has sunk into communism. Communism teaches and seeks two objectives: unrelenting class warfare, and absolute extermination of private ownership. Not secretly or by hidden methods does it do this, but publicly, openly, and by employing every and all means, even the most violent. To achieve these objectives, there is nothing which it does not dare, nothing for which it has respect or reverence, and when it has come to power, it is incredible and portent-like in its cruelty and inhumanity. The horrible slaughter and destruction through which has laid waste vast regions of Eastern Europe and Asia are evidence. How much an enemy and how openly hostile it is to Holy Church and to God Himself is, alas, too well proved by facts and fully known to all. Although we, therefore, deem it superfluous to warn upright and faithful children of the Church regarding the impious and iniquitous character of communism, yet we cannot, without deep sorrow, contemplate the heedlessness of those who apparently make light of these impending dangers, and with sluggish inertia allow the widespread propagation of doctrine which seeks by violence and slaughter to destroy society altogether. All the more gravely to be condemned is the folly of those who neglect to remove or change the conditions that inflame the minds of people, and pave the way for the overthrow, and destruction of society. The other section, which has kept the name of socialism, is surely more moderate. It not only professes a rejection of violence, but modifies and tempers to some degree, if it does not reject entirely, the class struggle and the abolition of private ownership. One might say that, terrified by its own principles and by the conclusions drawn therefrom by communism, socialism inclines toward, and in a certain measure approaches the truths which social tradition has always held sacred. For it cannot be denied that its demands at times come very near those that Christian reformers of society justly insist upon. For if the class struggle abstains from enmities and mutual hatred, it gradually changes into an honest discussion of differences founded on a desire for justice. And if this is not that blessed social peace which we all seek, it can and ought to be the point of departure from which to move forward to the mutual cooperation of the industries and professions. So also the war declared on private ownership, more and more abated, is being so restricted now, finally, not the possession itself of the means of production of attack, but rather a kind of sovereignty over society which ownership has, contrary to all right, seized and usurped. For such sovereignty belongs in reality not to owners, but to the public authority. If the foregoing happens, it can come even to the point that imperceptibly these ideas of a more moderate socialism will no longer differ from the desires and demands of those who are striving to remold human society on the basis of Christian principles. For certain kinds of property, it is rightly contended, ought to be reserved to the state, since they carry with them a dominating power so great that cannot, without danger to the general welfare, be entrusted to private individuals. Such just demands and desire have nothing in them now which is inconsistent with Christian truth, and much less are they special to socialism. Those who work solely towards such ends have, therefore, no reason to become socialists. Yet let no one think that all the socialist groups or factions that are not communists have, without exception, recovered their senses to this extent, either in fact or in name. For the most part, they do not reject the class struggle or the abolition of ownership, but only in some degree modify them. Now, if these false principles are modified and to some extent erased from the program, the question arises, or rather is raised without warrant by some, whether the principles of Christian truth cannot perhaps be also modified to some degree and be tempered so as to meet socialism halfway, and, as it were, by a middle course come to agreement with it. There are some allured by the foolish hope that socialists in this way will be drawn to us. A vain hope! Those who ought to be apostles among socialists ought to profess Christian truth whole and entire, openly and sincerely, and not connive at error in any way. If they truly wish to be heralds of the gospel, let them above all strive to show to the socialists that socialist claims, so far as they are just, are far more strongly supported by the principles of Christian faith and much more effectively promoted the power of Christian charity.